to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast with financial planner and retirement specialist Dan Haylett. In this podcast, Dan explores ways to help you overcome the behavioural, emotional and financial challenges of life after work. Join Dan for the journey where he will explore how our wonderful human brain will naturally fight against what it takes to live a happy, healthy and wealthy retirement. Dan will draw on years of expertise, experience and expert guests to solve the behavioural, emotional and financial challenges of life after work. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast. I'm your host, Dan Haylett, and I cannot wait to dive into today's show as I get to have a conversation with the founder of Transitus Wealth Partners, one of the leading voices for the shift towards human-first financial guidance, and my really good friend, Ross Marino. Ross, a warm welcome to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast.
Thanks so much, Dan. It's great to be on the show. Love the podcast. I actually joke that when I grew up, I always thought I would do a podcast like Humans versus Retirement because I think it's such a great topic that you would talk about. And of course, I got a little distracted along the way, but I love the work you're doing. I love the guests that you have on. It's a great show. So excited to be here.
Thank you, sir. That means a lot coming from you. So no, it means a great deal. And I can't wait to dive into this conversation. You're what I would consider a true expert in retirement planning. It's where you spend, most of your time. It's where your career and your life's work has kind of been dedicated to around these kind of life and financial transitions and the shift. And we're going to use that word quite a lot today, I think, because it resonates with you. And we'll get onto that, I'm sure, shortly. The shift towards human beings and not spreadsheets. So the work that you do is so important, and I'm a massive fan of that work because you're leading that charge on that shift towards the emotional and behavioural impact that money has, particularly around this big transition that we've come to call retirement. So we've talked a lot over the last couple of months or so, and I'd love for you to share your kind of really fascinating and actually quite heartfelt and story of how you've got to where you've got to today, and a glimpse as to, I think, why you do what you do and why you're so passionate around your work. I'd love for you to share that with the listeners, Ross.
Sure, happy to share. So I've been a financial advisor since the late 1980s. By the mid-1990s, I understood that financial planning, taking a look at everything, was really the path that I needed to take and what I thought was going to be in the best interest of everybody that I served. So my wife and I moved up the coast. We're in the U.S. We moved to a city called Wilmington in North Carolina. The plan to open a financial planning practice in Wilmington. Within 30 days of arriving there, I had a serious back injury and really couldn't leave the house for about the next 6 years. So instead of going out and having lunches with prospective clients and doing meetings, I spent the next 6 years mostly working in a room over my garage, lying on the floor on pillows and trying to build a practice over the phone. That was my first wake-up call of, it's great to have plans, but life really doesn't care. And life happens and plans need to change. And really kind of floored me in many ways, no pun intended, where you really thought you had this plan put together, but then all of a sudden you just had to figure things out. And as my practice grew and I got a little bit better, about 10 years after that, 15 years after that, my wife and I decided to adopt a couple of girls. The youngest turned out to have some special needs. We didn't know that going in. To keep the story short, it took about 13 years to get an accurate diagnosis. And along the ways, anybody who's a parent knows when you can't figure out how to help your child, there's really nothing worse. So to ask me, what am I going to do in retirement when I'm in the middle of all that? I really don't have an answer because I'm still trying to figure out what am I going to do for my daughter. In the middle of that, my wife ended up falling ill. So I found myself around 2015 as like a single parent for my daughter and a caregiver for my wife. And in this, I'm talking with clients and we're talking about the future and so forth. In my world, I really couldn't plan for the future. But what I learned along the way as I share my story with people, this isn't that uncommon. Many people have plans. They look forward to here's what I might do when I retire. Here's what I think I'm doing right now. And then life just happens and you are totally disrupted and it just doesn't change your plans. That's a simple way of saying it's like Captain Obvious. Yes, I have to do something differently. It actually disrupts your whole world where you have no idea what the next 20 days are going to look like, let alone the next 20 years. And here we are as financial planners trying to have conversations with people about 20 years from now, being totally insensitive, not intentionally, but just not understanding that we really needed to help them right there, right then with specific needs, but we just weren't really equipped to do it. And it was about 2015, I said, I've got to figure out what happens when life happens and plans change. I got to figure out how to help people make decisions during those times. And that's when I went down the path of focusing on transition planning and life events.
You've done that very well to summarize that in that short space of time. You've obviously been through a lot, and I think it's really shaped how passionate you are, as I said before, in the work you're doing. So, I just want to, say kind of, it's a massive privilege to kind of speak to you about this stuff. And thank you for keeping going, I think, because the work that you're doing is just absolutely amazing. So, so look, I think the challenges around life transitions are really interesting, aren't they? Because I think, look, you're, as I said before, you're a leading voice and an advocate for what you call human first financial guidance. And it's interesting because I think, that shifting towards shifting the conversation towards humans, not spreadsheets. And you've literally wrote the book on it, right? It's called Shaping Change, How to Respond When Life Disrupts Your Retirement Plan. So you've been through that. This is coming from firsthand experience of, real disruption to your plans and to your life. We can forget the word retirement, right? As you said, life just gets disrupted along the way, whether you're 65 or 45 or 30, life disrupts. What do you, having written the book and done some amazing work on those life transitions and been through this yourself, what do you think are some of those real challenges then when it comes to this man-made human thing that we have labeled retirement?
I think the basics of humans hate uncertainty and just trying to think, what do I want in the future, are really our challenges. So the uncertainty part is to say, hey, I might retire and we'll see how this goes. It's nice to say that, but let's be honest, as human beings, we don't actually like that for the most part. We want to know. I love how people make fun of cats, where if you close a door in a house and you leave it cracked, what does the cat have to do, right? Cat's got to come through the door. Whenever I hear that, I always think, so do people. This isn't just a cat thing. If you do that to me, I've got to know what's on the other side of the door. We don't like the unknown. Our brain doesn't like gaps. We want to fill in the gaps. And when we look towards retirement, we really don't know what's going to go on, especially if we've taken the bulk of our schedule, what we put our time and our energy into, what we're pouring our lives into, and all of a sudden that goes away. Now there's this huge open space and it's filled with uncertainty. We're not sure what's going to go on. So I think as humans, we're not real comfortable with that. That's definitely going to be a challenge. The second part, which fortunately we're now seeing more and more people talk about this, it's the end of history illusion. It's that idea in my mind that who I am today is roughly who I'm going to be 10 and 20 years from now. However, who I am today is not real similar to who I was 10, 20 years ago, right? There's similarities, sure, but I've grown, I've evolved, I've progressed. I view things differently, what I like, what I don't like, what I consider leisure, how I like to spend my time, what I put my energy into. Things change over time. So if you look at my last 10 to 20 years, I've gone through plenty of changes. But somehow I look for the next 10 to 20 years and I think, gee, what will I like 20 years from now? Well, I'm sorry, I'm not actually qualified to answer that. And I use that with clients all the time as a joke of, I'm not qualified to answer for future Ross. I don't know what I'm going to like 20 years from now. And I know we love to plan and we love to say, oh, what if I could do this? It's great to dream and there's value in that. But I really don't know what I'm going to want 20 years from now because I'm not going to be the same person. I think that's hard, Dan, to explain to people that they're not going to be the same person 20 years from now. And if someone said, well, great, who am I going to be? I'm like, I don't know. Neither do you, because it's a work in progress. And how do you plan 20 years from now when there's definitely going to be uncertainty, and I'm not really sure what kind of person I'm going to be and what's going on around in my life. I'm not really sure how to answer that, but I'm a financial planner anyway. It's a little tricky.
A future guest on the podcast, Hal Hirschfield, has written a wonderful book called Your Future Self, and Hal's been gracious enough to come on the podcast. So he, there's so much work in that, because I think it's such one of the most difficult things that we can do as human beings, because we just believe the status quo, right? That is just, it is what it is, and we're going to be there. But to actually put ourselves forward and to think that we're going to be totally different, I try and do it where I go, look back. So what was you like 20 years ago? Was you the same as you are now? And they're like, no, well, describe to me the changes you've been through over the last 20 years. Well, you're going to go through that again. The one guarantee is you're going to go through stuff again. So I think that's, it's a really important conversation to have with people, that to get comfortable with that uncertainty, as you said, isn't it? Be comfortable with the fact that your plans will change and you will change and your dynamics will change. That means that, everything that we plan today is never going to be executed.
Well, it makes me wonder if we're trying to figure out something that can't be figured out. I mean, is that really what we're trying to do as financial planners planning for retirement? We can do general principles, and there's ways to do that, and it's important to do it. However, the real specifics, you can't really figure it out. It is, your journey is your journey. My journey is my journey. And neither of us know what that's going to look like 10 or 20 years from now, aside from the obvious of we could be dead. But if we're alive, we don't really know. And when you've worked with clients for so many years, as you have, and as I have, we've watched it. I could take my calendar today. So the day we're recording, had a meeting right before we started recording, Dan, and I have 2 other client meetings after this. I can give you specific, massive life disruptions that have happened in all 3 lives of the 3 meetings that I have today. One is people who are younger than me and now have an incurable cancer, just came up a few months ago. The next was actually a brain tumor out of nowhere. Then the next after that would be having to take care of kids that they didn't plan on taking care of, more like grandkids, that totally disrupted their lives, and they had to shift everything. All the planning leading up to that had value, but it was almost like starting from square one when you have to talk with these people, because the financial needs, the desires, things that were going on, they were all shuffled all over the board. That's massive disruption. That's just today. Those are my 3 meetings today, and that's what we have. So these aren't like, oh, I heard a story or it's an anecdote. This is real life. This is what people go through. I go through it. You go through it. Let's just talk about it. It's real. So are we going to plan for the future? Absolutely. But we're going to accept the fact that life is going to happen and these plans will change, maybe even tomorrow.
100%. I think the uncertainty is really interesting to me, because I think that leads to some stuff that I think it leads to stuff as human beings that we try to grab certainty. So actually what numbers provide us and spreadsheets is an element of certainty. So we kind of gravitate towards the numbers because the numbers can actually kind of appear on a bar chart, and the bar chart can show us some assumptions and where it's going to go, right? So, but I think the problem there is that we then end up focusing on the numbers because they do give us an element of certainty, whereas actually the thing that will provide us with the most problems are the human elements. And we don't really focus on that. The transition from a career of, where you've had identity, as we've talked about on the podcast before, and all the other stuff that comes with a career. That transition, the transition of parents getting older and, kids growing up and leaving the nest, and all these things that, we really don't like to, as human beings, I think, delve deep into that, because we're just going to focus on these numbers. Because as financial planners, unfortunately, and as you and the work that you've done, we're now shifting this conversation towards humans. But I think for too long, the industry has focused on the numbers because that means that we can provide a bit of certainty to these people, which they can go away in a bit more comfort. So I think, is that something you agree with? Something that you feel that it's, I think, as you've said before, this is not maths questions. These are human problems, right?
It's so easy to focus on the numbers for multiple reasons. I'd say the first is they actually have an answer, right? Math is math. I remember a buddy telling me I loved math class because it didn't matter if the teacher liked me. I thought that's a pretty good statement. You're right, because the answer is the answer, right? If you get it right, you get it right. And 10% return on my portfolio is equal to 10% return on your portfolio. It's the same, right? It's immutable, I think, right? It's numbers are the numbers. So they're so much easier to work with. And we've got to work with something, because for me to actually ask you what really matters to you, what makes life meaningful, if I get into the questions that are human driven, these are not easy questions. And how I answered those questions 5 years ago is not necessarily how I'd answer them today. And I'll give you a couple examples of that would be math related and human related. I remember years ago when I first started using risk tolerance questionnaires for clients, right? Very important. We have to talk about if you have X amount in your portfolio and it goes down by 10, 20, 30%, you got to feel that. If you have this much money and it goes down to this value, how would you feel? That's a basic question. It's theoretical, but in the world of the markets, it's reality. It could happen. So we have to talk about that. We would gauge people of this is your risk tolerance based on how they answered those questions. But then I remember asking the same people some of the same questions when it was a bear market and their portfolios were down in value. And guess what? Life happened. It's called a bear market. Not only did plans change, my portfolio risk tolerance changed. People all of a sudden wanted to be more conservative. So we see as life goes on, we see it go back and forth. So even though we have finite numbers to work with, it's never going to be enough, because how we perceive it, how we feel about it, it's always going to be different at times. Sometimes I'm going to look at money and I'm going to think it's way more important than it really is. I may be hyper focused on it. Other times I may not care as much about it when probably I should be. So as a human being, what I'm interested in, what I want to talk about, what I'm putting my time and energy and focus into, it's going to come and go over time. That's all part of the human side, Dan. That's what makes it so hard, because frankly, today, I may not want to talk about money, but this may be my update day for a meeting with my financial planner, and they want to talk about money. I don't want to talk about money today, but maybe next quarter, I want to talk for an hour about it. These things come and go, and that's what makes it so hard, is if we just focus on numbers, it's simple, it's straightforward, they are what they are. But when we get into the human side, you often don't know what you're getting into, but also there isn't always a right answer. It's an evolving process of this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling. And, I think Ashley Kwame, right? So don't leave home without your coffee cup that says think, feel, do. And my clients are trained. They know what I'm going to ask them. What are you thinking? How are you feeling? Because until we answer those two questions, we can't talk about what are we going to do. With math, it's pretty straightforward if you're just trying to do math type questions. But in the world of life, it's a little bit harder to do.
Yeah. Ashley was a great guest, actually. It was a really good conversation. And I totally agree. I think the one point I want to go, there's an interesting study I saw that I come across, and it was a US study, and they talked to people in different wealth levels about how much is enough. And the answer was always about twice as much as what they've got. Yeah. So it's kind of, it doesn't matter whether you've got $500,000 or $1 million. It's $1 million or 2 million. So this kind of fascination on the enough number, where we actually need to be fascinating on enough for what, right? That's kind of, and why, because that is the real crux of what your individual, unique, beliefs and desires and dreams and skills will always kind of take advantage of. If you're always focusing on the number, no matter what your number is and how many zeros at the end of it, you're always going to go, because as human beings, as you know, we're wired for more, right? Enough is never enough until we figure out for what. And I think that's where a lot of this work is coming, which is really important.
I think the transition that people need to think about as they go into retirement is they want to shift their mindset. They want to, if possible, worry less about what could go wrong, because that's instinctive, right? Worry less about what could go wrong so they can focus more on what to get right. And it's hard to come to that point where you say, I think I have enough. I feel good about what I have, unless you've taken care of what could go wrong. So in our world, I talk about getting your ducks in a row, and I have all these little rubber ducks all over my desk that I show when I'm doing Zoom meetings with people, and everybody laughs. And I've got this whole container because, well, we have a lot of ducks. We have to get those in order. I don't know the future. I can't predict everything that could possibly go wrong, but I can get to a point where I feel like I'm doing the best I can with what I have. When I get to that point, when I get organized, when I work with the professional and we go down the list of everything, and that includes legal, estate planning, taxes, investments, it's everything. You put it all together. When I go through that process, I can reasonably say, I think I'm doing the best I can with what I have. When you get to that point, you naturally will worry less about what could go wrong. And now you're in a position, and this is the transition to retirement, to really focus on what do I want to get right. But I think it's really hard to focus on what's meaningful to you. How much is enough? What do I want to get right? It's hard to answer those questions if I first haven't settled. Is there things that I need to be worrying about that I shouldn't be worrying about? I have to get to that point where I can worry less. That's the financial planning process. To me, that's the entrance into retirement. You have to get your ducks in a row. You have to take a look at everything and not just say, well, I just hope for the best. Well, I do too, but I'm also going to do the work. So let's sit down, let's get organized, let's look at everything. Then I can hope for the best. Now I can focus on what to get right. It's going to make for a much more fulfilling retirement experience.
Do you think that people will naturally struggle to figure this stuff out on their own, right? I think this is a really difficult conversation to have with yourself or your spouse, and I think that's where the facilitation that we give as these human first financial planners that we want to do and have these conversations. I think it's, I've had clients say to me that, that they've thought about having these conversations, but never really had the environment to feel like they can, broach that and say it with any type of accountability, or feel like it won't end up in an argument or something. And I think just providing that environment is so eye-opening. Looks like, you can physically see the weight coming off people's shoulders as they talk about this stuff. I can imagine it would be really challenging for anyone entering in retirement to facilitate this conversation themselves.
Maybe there's someone who is so super self-aware and in touch with themselves that they can walk down their own path and figure all this out. And if you met anyone out there, yet? Well, God bless you.
Yeah.
I don't know who they are. And, that's not in my world. There's something about what's instinctive with our normal thought process where we're going to worry about things that could go wrong. It is instinctive. We may think about certain things that we want to get right, but to have someone walk you down a path and ask you questions that they're subjective, they don't have number answers, they're not math answers, it's going to make me think. For me to ask myself that question versus you asking that question to me, that's a whole different world. That would be if you've had Warren Berger on your show yet, someone who really understands questions. He calls himself a questionologist, right? He's got really love his books. But he would be able to describe how when someone asks you a question, it prompts something different in your brain and a different type of reaction, as opposed to you just trying to do the questions yourselves. So the value for us to do that for someone, it's something that I don't think people can do on their own. But frankly, would they want to? Because we get so much joy out of having those conversations when people say, and you've had this, Dan, no one's ever asked me that before. I can't say that without grinning. That is so cool when someone says that. Well, not only did I ask, I really want to know the answer. So what's up? What's going on? I love asking those questions. So we're able to walk down a path with people that on their own, I'm not sure they could get there. But with us doing that with them, and it's almost like coaching, you're just putting a flashlight in front of the next step to help them walk and see what's going on. It's a rewarding thing. I love doing it. I think it's neat. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier. How they'll answer those questions today may change in 5 years from now. So it's not a one and done type scenario. This is an ongoing process of constantly checking what matters to you? What are you thinking about today? What is a meaningful and fulfilling life to you? We've got to always be checking on that stuff because it's going to change over time.
Yeah, and I think that's why the word for me, guidance and guiding, is so important in this process, right? I think, this kind of, and I think, as I've said before in the podcast, and you've said this in not so many words today, but a financial plan is wrong the moment it's created. It's because it's just a snapshot of that time. Soon as you walk out the office, or soon as you kind of get home, it's wrong. So, like, guiding and ongoing guidance is so important for people. You want that person to walk life with you and to be there to go, right, this has happened, what now? This has happened, what next? And that is part of the shift and the transition. I think that the way I look at it is, I've had many clients that have stepped back in their retirement, and during work they've had guidance. They've either had a boss or they've had people to hold them accountable. They're now stepping into a phase of life where they're going it probably more alone than they've ever gone it before, and their relationship is changing with their spouse, and they haven't really got anyone to turn to. And that's where I see some of the challenges happen. It's that kind of, everybody needs their tribe, right? There's a lot of research done on kind of, making sure that we've got people around us that we kind of resonate with and trust and get on with. So that's why I think guiding and guidance is so important when it comes to thinking about how to kind of walk through retirement properly.
Yeah, and I think the shift is really from advice to guidance. And advice often is answer man type stuff. It's, here's what you need to do, here's how you should do it. When people approach a financial planner, it's often for advice. That's what prompts them reaching out to a financial planner. They want to know what to do and how to do it. They're generally not thinking they want the line of questioning that we're going to go down with them. So that's usually not how they approach us. But as soon as we shift the conversation, they open up, because that's what really matters. And they get it. I don't have to convince someone that leading a fulfilling life is more important than having more money. I mean, if I did, I don't think that person would be coming to me anyway. But everybody wants a fulfilling life. They get it. Once you start talking about it, they get it. And that whole transition to retirement, it's almost like, here's an example. It's looking at your job. When we just look at the numbers and someone says, I'm going to retire, we think, what does that mean financially? Right? So as the Shaping Wealth would call the mechanic, right? What does this mean to the numbers? It means less income. It means my benefits change. It means my expenses change. And we start doing math. And you know what? I can do that math, Dan. It's great. I've got a calculator, but so much of that stuff, I can do it in my head, assuming I round off the numbers. We can do that. So that's the math part. That's great. We see that as a change. That's just a fraction of the change. If we ask someone, why do you love your work? What do you love about your job? Chances are they're not going to say, it's because I make this much money. I don't think that's going to be the first things that come out of their mouth. But what makes their job fulfilling? They still need to fill those needs during retirement. We think, I'm finished working, I'm going to ride off into the sunset, and this is it. Now I can do whatever I feel like. The reason you loved work is because work filled those needs that we have as basic humans. We want purpose. We like challenges. We like to be connected. We want to be part of a community, part of a tribe. There's all these things that drive us as humans. Work fills so many of those needs. That's why we love working. The money's great and we need the money. But once we go into retirement, yes, we have to figure out, what does this mean financially? But if we neglect the other part of it, it doesn't matter if we think we get the numbers right. Retirement's going to be a struggle. So we have to intentionally look at, besides the money, what is it that we loved about working? What made my life fulfilling? And how am I going to fill those needs once I retire? Because if I retire on Friday and all of a sudden Monday, I'm no longer working, I haven't changed that much over the weekend. My needs are still my needs. How am I going to replace what work was doing for me? It is not an easy thing.
I actually think it's the hardest thing. I think it's the hardest thing. And I think it's actually one of the things that people pay less attention to. I think, I think people probably spend more time planning a 2-week holiday than they do spending a 30-year retirement, right? I think they spend more time sweating over kind of where they're going and, what it looks like and has it got a gym and, but that kind of thing, the transport and, excursions and all that. So I think that there's more time spent on that than there is thinking about what this, losing the identity of work. One of the favorite exercises that I do with people is this retire to and from. So spending more time about what they're retiring to and less time on what they're retiring from. Because I think, again, that negativity comes away from it, right? It's kind of, well, I'm retiring from all of this bad stuff. So I need to get away. I need to get away. I need to get away. And then they get away, but they've not done anything about what they're getting away to. And then there's this massive void. And then they go back to work within 6 months because they've not filled it. So I think, looking at, as you said, what gives you joy about work. So what do you love about work? What do you not like? And then what are you really looking forward to doing with your time when you're not there, and what makes you anxious? And you start kind of filling out this little grid around that. I think it's a really important way to look at it. And I think in my experience, that needs to be done well in advance of any kind of handing in notice, right? We need to start figuring out what life will look like a good 12, 18 months, maybe 2 years before we start doing, because it takes a while to build up these social connections. I think I also saw the very famous Harvard study out there. There's an 85-year-old study about what makes people happy. And they've done this around retirement. So they found out that the number one thing that makes people happy in retirement is social connections. Where has most of our social connections been throughout our life? Work, right? So if we're kind of leaving those social connections behind, we need to kind of go and get some more, because that tells us that people with social connections are happier in retirement than people with not.
I was just reading that study Sunday morning. I was doing some study time on it, going over that Harvard study again and looking at some of their charts and graphs, because, they have numbers and I love that stuff.
Yeah.
So I was going over that, but I was looking at one of their takeaways, and this was from the most recent update. They looked at people who were 50 years old, and then they gauged their mortality at age 80. So what activities or what characteristics indicated higher quality of life, longevity, who was alive at 80, what was their life like? They looked at smoking, they looked at exercise, they looked at obesity, but the number one factor that determined your quality of life and if you were alive at age 80, it wasn't any of those things. It was the quality of your relationships. That hit me in a way that I actually started saying, okay, I've got to do some different things, because I'm fairly focused on being healthy physically and spiritually and emotionally. And I put some effort into that. Relationships take time and energy. It's probably an area that because we get so much at work, we probably don't put as much time as we think we do into it. But that was the determinant, where if you didn't have healthy relationships in your early 50s, it meant you had less longevity as you got older, less than someone who smoked or who ate too much. So if it's that important at age 50, I'm going to guarantee you it's that important at age 60 and 70 as well. Yep. That's at least my theory.
Yeah. And I think it's an area that we neglect, right? Because I think you're busy at work. You kind of rest on the laurels that you have relationships through work, but they're probably quite superficial relationships. Your relationship with your spouse takes a very different direction, as I talked to Ashley Kwame about. So you need to work on your relationship with your partner or your spouse. You need to work on your relationships with your friends. You will get new relationships with people that might become your best friends. So I think that, as you said, there's a lot of work, self-reflection, a lot of work that needs to be done by people in retirement to make sure that they have longevity and they can live happy, and they fight off some of these horrible, like Alzheimer's or all these other kind of dementia, brain-led. So, making sure we're healthy, happy, that kind of social connection and building those relationships is so important. And we need to be doing that, as you said, in your 50s, 55, 60, before we get to that point.
Yeah, it's the same idea of thinking about what can I do today that will have an impact tomorrow. It's Hal Hirschfield. I was listening to his interview with Brian Portnoy this morning, actually. So that was my morning study time, was listening to Hal and about how looking towards the future, it's just one of those skills that are so important. But we can't just look towards the future. We have to understand, what are the things we need to look at? What are the areas where we should put our attention into? And the easy ones are, make sure you save enough money. We get that. Make sure your health is good. We get that. I think relationships might be one, especially for men. I think we struggle a little bit with the significance of those relationships in their lives. Well, let me just say that's differently so the men won't be defensive. I struggle with the significance of that. And being a man, I'm pretty sure I'm not alone on that. But that is an issue that we have to think about. That's probably an area that is more valuable than we know. We underappreciate how important those relationships are as men. And we get a lot of that at work. When we go into retirement, it gets a little bit tougher because a lot of those relationships, it's like a hard stop. It's not, we'll see if we can get together on the weekends. Well, no, if you saw somebody regularly, it's probably a hard stop. That's traumatic for pretty much anybody.
Before I want to pick up on one thing before we kind of wrap up. And you mentioned it, and I just want to delve a bit deeper into this. We spoke before we hit record, and you've mentioned this a little bit during the conversation. We said something along the lines of how could you enjoy retirement if you always focus on what will go wrong? And I think I think it's really interesting. It relates into everything that we just talked about, because I do think that without guidance, without looking at future self, without thinking about building relationships, without some of that positivity around that, our brains will always probably go negative. So if we go negative and we focus on, well, what if the markets fall and I haven't got a plan for that? And, I feel I've left work and I've not got the social circles and I feel I don't want to get out of bed. I've got no purpose and all this stuff. You always kind of focus on the wrong thing. You actually then, you lose focus on what's in front of you, the immediate opportunity that tomorrow brings. And I think when we start focusing on what's wrong, we have that kind of inertia. We do nothing, which I think is really dangerous when it comes to retirement.
Yeah, there's a survival instinct that we have where we have to be concerned about what could go wrong because in evolutionary biology, at least, we would have an issue if we looked into the bushes and thought, there's probably nothing there, but it was a lion. Life is over. So this is instinctive to us. I think that the challenge with helping people worry less isn't to make their worry go away, but to embrace the fact that it is normal to worry. And today I may worry more than I did a year ago. Today I may worry less than I will a year from now. My level of worry and anxiety may fluctuate up and down, will fluctuate over time. However, it is going to be instinctive. So going into maybe like a money script test, Klantz money script, or going over any type of behavioral assessment is to just recognize that, yes, I may be someone that worries a little bit more. I may be someone that is sensitive to anxiety. Not a bad thing, right? It's not irrational. It's human. So if that's how you are, that's okay. And it's just accepting that regardless of how much planning we do, you can worry less, but you won't not worry at all. And to me, that's the challenge. It's to focus on worry less. What I worry about, my wife may not. What my wife worries about, I may not. We're not going to be on the same page with that just because we're different, regardless of what's going on in life. Now, I could actually say to her, honey, you shouldn't worry about that, or you shouldn't feel that way. Yes, as a husband, I actually said that decades ago, way before marriage counseling. I'm much better now. But yes, you actually make that statement, you shouldn't feel that way, which is kind of funny at my age. Like that actually came out of my mouth, but it's normal. You should feel how you feel. It's not irrational or rational. It's just how you feel. And really in that moment, it actually is rational. If you think about it, it would make sense. So embrace the fact that survival is part of it. We are going to worry at times. Anxiety is normal. We want to do the best we can in planning so we can worry less. But accept the fact that there's going to be a level of worry and level of anxiety at all times. Sometimes it may be a lot more, not because we didn't plan or we should have done something differently. That's just how life is. So I think trying to be self-aware of that and really talking through that is going to be most helpful to people.
That's such a good tip. I think rewind on that one, everyone. That's such a good tip. I think that's that self-awareness around that. What you worry about today, you might worry less tomorrow. You might not worry about it at all and have new worries in 5 years' time. As you said, things change, life moves on. And I think it's that ability to be flexible. Like I said in the last, in the wrap-up episode of season 1, be flexible, be adaptable, be resilient. These things are really, really important, and we're human beings. So, all of our decisions are made through the lens of experience and learning, and they're perfectly rational to all of us. And, the judgment that I think people may feel by feeling like what they're feeling is wrong is a big part of the problem. So I think that's such a great such a great tip. Look, let's wrap this up with some questions, Ross. Thank you so much for this wisdom that you've given us today. I know you mentioned that this question for you probably isn't one that's easy for you to answer, but I would like to ask it anyway, because I think the answer is actually really important. What will Ross's retirement look like?
Yeah, it's a great question for, I think, everybody to address. In my world, it's a little more challenging. So I can tell you that I'm a recovering destination thinker. So what I mean is I'm someone who used to think about what's going to happen down the road, what's going to happen in retirement. I'm a future person. So I'm a planner. I think that way. So I used to think about retirement and what it would be like. And then life kicked my butt and kicked it again. And now I realize I really have no idea what 20 years may look like for me. I have family situations where I don't know if those situations are going to be consistent 20 years from now, which are challenging. I don't know if they're going to be even harder. So I really don't know what that world looks like, and I don't want to project. But what I know I need to do is be happy and content in retirement. And I think the best way for me to ensure that is to figure out how to be happy and content today. So my focus is really on being present, being grateful, trying to understand, here's what makes life fulfilling today. Here's what I can do today. Here's how I can be happy. Here's things that matter to me. If I can figure that out today, right now, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to figure that out 20 years from now in retirement. So as long as I can do that, that's going to be my focus. So I'm not real worried about 20 years from now. I try not to think about it. Won't say I won't. That's why I say I'm a recovering destination thinker. So I try not to think, what will life be like 20 years from now? I really want to focus on today, figure out things that matter. The middle of today, Dan, before I actually came into the office, it was kind of the middle of my day. Instead of going to study for an hour, which was on kind of my schedule, I went to an indoor golf range and I hit balls for an hour. Felt great. And then I came back into work. That's part of figuring out how to enjoy today. If I can manage my day and my life where it's fulfilling and I'm content and I can say, you know what, I'm doing the best I can with what I have and I feel pretty good. If I can do that today, I think I'll rock retirement. I
think you'll rock life, right? Forget retirement. That's just kind of,
right.
Yeah, that's kind of, I suppose my next question is the answer. You just answered it around, you put yourself in financial planner mode and I'm sitting across the table from you and we've established the money thing's cool. Would what you've just said be your number one tip to live a happy, healthy and wealthy retirement stroke life? Is that the thing that you think if we can get that across and people can understand that, that's going to fundamentally shift their life?
Yeah, I think the shift is how do I become content today? Because I'm not going to get there 20 years from now, or it's going to be challenging if I can't get there today, right? I have to figure out what makes life meaningful today. What can I say? I'm content if I'm doing this. If I can get to that point today, that's the tip. That's the magic of tomorrow. Because then I don't have to worry about 10 years from now. Because if I know how to figure out what matters most to me, I don't care what year it is. I don't care how old I am. If I don't want to say master that, but if I can be self-aware and focused and put energy into this is what matters, here's how I determine what matters to me, then yes, I've mastered life. I guess you can put it that way.
Absolutely brilliant. I love that. One final question, then I'm going to let you go. You've been working with retirees for many years. What do you think is the biggest opportunity for people in this phase of life?
I think it's the freedom, Dan. It's the fact that you now get to decide how you spend your time, your energy, and money in ways that matter to you most. Because if you think about most of your working years, if you're working, it takes a lot of time and energy, and you only have so much extra money. And if you have children, if you're raising children, it takes time and energy, and you probably don't have extra money, right? Because that's part of it. So you may have spent decades where your resources, time, energy, and money had constraints. Many of those constraints have just been thrown off. And here you are going into retirement, and now you get to make the call. If I want to work, I'm going to work. If I want to golf, I'm going to golf. If I want to spend time with family, I'm going to spend time with family. But I actually have the ability to do that. I have the agency to make those decisions. So that freedom with my time, my energy, and any resources I have to do things that matter most to me, I mean, that's exciting stuff. That's pretty awesome.
What a wonderful, wonderful, positive way to end this great conversation. Ross, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. It's been such a great conversation, and thank you for the work that you're doing. And can't wait to kind of be part of those conversations going forward with you.
It's an honor to be on the show. Thanks so much, Dan.
Cheers, Ross. Thank you. And look, thank you everyone for listening to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you with me today. Until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. Subscribe to be notified when new episodes become available. We would love to have you along for the journey. If you like what you heard, then we would appreciate you taking a few minutes to leave us a review. And lastly, if you want to explore your retirement plans further, download our free 7-step retirement GPS toolkit linked in the show notes. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of TFP or Dan Haylett. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, so please always seek the advice of professionals with any questions you may have regarding your retirement.